Month 11. A manager closes a laptop after a short conversation, and a badge gets deactivated before lunch. It is the second time this year that same seat has emptied. Both times, the person was under 25. Both times, the manager used almost the same phrase to explain it. Maybe you were that hire. Maybe you are the manager who has now done this twice and does not enjoy it. Maybe you just watched the desk beside you turn over again. So, what actually happens between the offer letter and the exit? The surveys are not subtle about this. In recent employer surveys, a majority of hiring managers report having let go of a recent graduate they hired, often within the first year. And the reasons they give cluster tightly: lack of motivation, poor communication, unprofessional behavior. Look closely at that list because something is off about it. Those are not tasks. They are traits. Nobody in those surveys says the employee could not build the report or failed to learn the software. The complaints are about who the person appeared to be, which is a very different kind of judgment, and it is exactly the kind psychologists have studied for 50 years. Lee Ross named the fundamental attribution error in the 1970s. It describes a lopsided habit in how we explain behavior. When other people do something, we tend to explain it through their character. When we do the same thing, we explain it through our circumstances. Someone else is late because they are careless. You are late because the trains were down. Now, watch that error operate inside an office. A new hire is stuck on something for 2 days and does not ask for help. The manager sees avoidance and reads it as a person who does not care. What the employee experienced was different. They had been told the team was slammed. They had watched a colleague get a curt reply to a basic question. They concluded, reasonably, that asking would mark them as incapable. Same behavior, two completely different explanations. Only one of them ends up in the performance file. And notice which direction the error runs. The manager has authority, a longer history in the building, and the vocabulary to describe what happened. The new hire has none of that. So when the two interpretations collide, the one that becomes the official record is not the more accurate one. It is the one held by the person with more standing in the room. So why is this happening more now? Because something quietly disappeared from entry-level work, and almost nobody noticed while it was going. For decades, the first year of a career was an apprenticeship that nobody called an apprenticeship. You learned by overhearing. You heard how your manager handled an angry client on the phone. You saw someone get pulled aside and could tell from their face that a line existed. You picked up tone, timing, and hierarchy through hundreds of small observations that nobody ever scheduled or wrote down. Then that layer thinned. Onboarding moved to video calls. The ambient curriculum stopped running, and it was never replaced with explicit instruction, because you cannot deliberately replace a lesson nobody knew they were teaching. So a generation arrived at work with the same intelligence and less of the invisible syllabus, and the gap got labeled as attitude. Think about how specific those missing lessons actually are. How long you are allowed to take before replying to a message from someone senior. Whether "let me know if you have questions" is an invitation or a formality. Whether declining a meeting is permitted and from whom. How much certainty to project when you are only 60% sure, when a joke is fine, and when the room has turned. None of that is written anywhere. All of it is graded. Talia Bauer, who has spent her career researching how newcomers succeed inside organizations, has shown consistently that what predicts a new employee working out is not personality. It is role clarity, confidence in their own ability to do the job, and social acceptance by the team. All three of those are things the organization either supplies or fails to supply. Which raises the obvious question: why doesn't the manager just tell them? Here is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. Because the manager usually decided months earlier.
Ask managers when they knew, and a striking number will point to month 3. Something happened, an email with the wrong tone, a missed deadline handled badly, a meeting where the person seemed checked out, and a private verdict formed. What follows is not 8 months of coaching. It is 8 months of avoidance.
of a difficult conversation being postponed because it is unpleasant and there is always something more urgent. Meanwhile, the employee is receiving silence and interpreting it exactly as you would. No news is good news. So the ending feels completely different from each seat. One person experiences a sudden ambush. The other experiences a decision they have been carrying for most of a year. And it is worth being fair to the manager here, because the avoidance is not usually cruelty. Most managers were never trained to manage. They were promoted for being good at the job they are no longer doing, handed a team, and given no instruction in the one skill the new role actually requires, which is telling someone something they do not want to hear while it is still small. So they wait. They hope it corrects itself. They tell themselves the person might be a better fit somewhere else. Two people are guessing in that building, not one. And when feedback finally does arrive, it often makes things worse. Avraham Kluger and Angelo Danisi conducted a landmark review of hundreds of studies on feedback and found something that still unsettles managers who read it. More than a third of feedback interventions actually reduced performance. The ones most likely to backfire were the ones that pointed at the person instead of the task, which is precisely what happens in these conversations. You need to be more professional, points at the person. It cannot be acted on because it does not describe a behavior. It only describes a disappointment. Tessa West, a psychologist at New York University who studies workplace communication, has pointed out the downstream cost of this. Young employees frequently leave without a clear understanding of what actually went wrong, which means the firing teaches them nothing, and they carry the same unnamed habit into the next job, where it produces the same outcome. That is the part that should bother everyone in this story. The system generates a punishment without a diagnosis, and it is expensive. Every one of these exits burns months of recruiting, onboarding, and lost productivity. And then the same role opens again with the same undocumented expectations waiting for the next person to fail to guess them. So what would actually change it? If you are early in a career, the single most useful move is to make the invisible visible. Ask what good looks like in specifics. Ask for a check-in at week 6 and again at month 3. And ask directly whether anything you are doing is landing wrong. That question is uncomfortable to ask and almost impossible to answer with silence. If you manage someone, the word professionalism is where a real diagnosis goes to die. Behind it, there is always a specific behavior with a specific alternative. Name that instead, and name it in week 2 rather than month 11, when it is still information rather than a verdict. Month 11. A laptop closes and a badge deactivates before lunch. And now you know that the decision in that room was not made in that room. And the thing being punished was almost never a character flaw. It was a lesson nobody remembered to teach. Most people who get fired that first year were never actually failing. They were guessing in a building where the answers were never written down.